I saw this, and Monsi, I'd love your opinion on this one. Same thing with you, Jay Stu. Charlotte has been granted permission to interview Lindsey Harding. Lindsey Harding is the G League Coach of the Year. G League Coach of the Year. And I think it's great that they're interviewing the G League Coach of the Year. But we can also be honest with this and say, okay, are they doing it because they think she should be a head coach? And before you say, hey, Doug, your male inner chauvinist pig is coming out. Like, okay. Who was the G League Coach of the Year last year? His name's Ronnie Burrell from the Long Island Nets. Year before,
never heard of him.
Year before that, Mahmoud Abdel Fattah. Before that, Stan Heath, who was coach at South Florida, coached at Arkansas, of course, famously led Kent State to the Elite Eight. Martin Schiller, Will Weaver, Dan Craig, Stan Morrison. Hey, Mike Miller was Coach of the Year. Remember Mike Miller, star in the NBA, played for the Miami Heat. In 2017, 2018, he was G League Coach of the Year with the Westchester Knicks. Did he ever interview for a head coaching job? Ever? Connor Henry, Alex Jensen, any of these guys? No. Now, Nick Nurse was the head coach of the Iowa Energy. He actually coached me in the USBL. He was an assistant coach back in the day. But his path from 2011, right? 2011, he was G League Coach of the Year. He went to the Rio Grande Vipers. He was their coach for 2 more years. Then he was an assistant for 5 years with the Toronto Raptors before becoming a head coach. Now, I don't think Lindsey Harding becomes the head coach of the Hornets. And I do think there's a little bit of, like, I get it. You want to open doors, and she's broken through as a woman who can coach men and done a good job. But, man, we're skipping steps in the NBA, aren't we? And so the question becomes, is you want equality, and that's totally fair and understandable. Okay? Because, like, the head coach doesn't hang out in the locker room. It's not. Now, there is a level of respect factor. You have to know how to handle people. But it's hard to do in the G League because you're constantly having a juggling roster. And as I've said about minor league sports, no one wants to be there. Right? So one team you're going to be on your life where no one wants to be there. The coaches want to be in the NBA. The players want to be in the NBA. The broadcasters want to be in the NBA. Nobody actually wants to be there. But it feels like we're doing the Rooney Rule. Jay, am I wrong? It feels like the Rooney Rule?
It does. And me being a white male, maybe I'm excused from this conversation because I always thought the Rooney Rule was kind of a patronizing thing to minorities. I always thought it was because in a lot of ways you heard feedback coming back from like coaches that were up for like 6 straight years of jobs and never got the jobs. And they were like,
sure,
just seems like I'm crossing off a box on the list. And if the NBA is going to go this route and do this kind of unofficial thing, because, you know, Adam Silver did state, I think it was last year, that there will be a woman head coach within the next 10 years. I thought that was odd for him to make that proclamation.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, well then is this the new thing? Each head coaching job in the NBA will have a female candidate. And is it kind of going through the motions, and is there any sincerity to it? And that's, so I guess it just seems patronizing, but maybe it's a good thing. Maybe it gets more people in front of decision makers. I never know where to go.
I don't mind that. I don't mind that part. I don't. I mean, and I've said this with the Rooney Rule. I don't think the Rooney Rules. I think getting, like, just the process of going through the interview, just the process of knowing what do I need to work on, what do I need to do to take that next step. I think that's super valuable, super valuable. But the way in which we cover it, and maybe not we, but the way in which it's covered is if, like, hey, this is a candidate, she should get it. Like, look, when you get a job, almost here's the, I don't know if you've ever heard this, Monty, everybody hates everybody, right? Like, whatever they say to you in front of your face, everybody hates everybody. I'm sure when I was on the set of the Final Four, I'd be like, yeah, you shouldn't be there. I'm sure when I do my show now, like, why do you have a show? I get that on Twitter all the time. If I want negativity, it's there. Okay, but are we overcorrecting for the past? I guess is my question.
Why does it have to be overcorrecting? And why can't it just be a genuine motion that didn't really happen overnight? Like, we can think about Becky Hammon and her and what she did with the Spurs, and even was the head coach when Pop was out because he was dealing with issues. And so there may be truth behind what Jason said about checking off a box in the moment. You guys may be right about that, but I feel that it is a natural progression, especially, Dawn Staley apparently was also approached by Portland at one point, was approached by the Washington Wizards about their coaching vacancy. She said this to Vanity Fair last November, and she didn't do it because she didn't want it to be like a publicity stunt. So obviously these questions are on the minds of these women. But, Lindsey Harding, it's great that in her first season, she was the G League Coach of the Year. She advanced her team to the Western Conference Finals. She's had success. She was a WNBA player and played 9 years. She was also a development coach for the 76ers and the Kings. So there is experience that is genuine with these women, and I feel like maybe it is just a very slow but real natural progression in that direction.
But that's not the natural progression is the point.
In what way?
Because the natural progression of being a G League coach is you go from G League coach to the NBA has 3 coaches in the front of the bench and unlimited coaches behind the bench. You usually go from being a G League coach to being behind the bench in the NBA, then to working your way up to front of the bench in the NBA as the third assistant, the second assistant, the first assistant, you get the job. That's how it works.
And I
occasionally, and look, there have been former players, NBA players that have skipped steps, no question. Steve Kerr had never coached a day in his life. Now he'd been a GM and he'd been a championship player, but he was an NBA championship player. And you're only going to win in the NBA. It's a hard one, right? It's a catch-22. You can't win unless the locker room respects you.
Right.
The locker room doesn't respect you unless you've won in the NBA.
But I think if you also have, you're right. I think that is probably the majority of what the mentality might be. But on the other side of things, like people are also willing to try something new lately. And when I say like a natural progression, you're right. That's not the normal progress, like you just explained it. But for women, it isn't. There has been no normal progression at all. So that's what I mean, that it's natural that now that these ladies are getting experience, maybe that's why these doors are opening. And it might still be checking off a box, which is annoying, but it's the beginning of something.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's a fascinating thought and experiment that at some point I think somebody will dive in and take. I just don't know if this is the one. And now people say Dawn Staley. What I like about Lindsey Harding is because she's been in professional sports, she understands the Dawn Staley thing. Look, in college athletics, just like college football coaches, men's college basketball coaches, it's about the coach. Right? Mm-hmm. When Dawn Staley coaches South Carolina, it's about Dawn Staley. When you coach in the NBA, it's about the players. Mm-hmm. And that's the hardest thing for college coaches to adjust to. I do think that the path she's going is a more likely path to end up being a head coach in the NBA than the path that even Becky Hammon went to. I don't think the WNBA. I think she went to the WNBA because she didn't get good. She didn't get good feedback from her time with the Spurs. And Dawn Staley, I don't think that would land well because of her style. Mm-hmm. And that style has been more pronounced because of her success. If you're having success and you have this, and we build up these gigantic egos, and the women's side is probably actually worse than the men now.